Hello, YouTube listeners. You are all very special because you have the ability to like episodes right here and now. So please hit that thumbs up before you close the tab and get to your creative work. It helps out so much for the YouTube algorithm, especially as I'm starting out. So thank you very much for doing that up front. And don't forget that you can always subscribe on your favorite podcast app to listen on your phone when you're on the go. Thanks for listening to this episode, and I'll see you face-to-face on Wednesday right here on YouTube for my shorter, bite-sized dose of inspiration. Enjoy the show and create something amazing. Your Creative Push, episode 353.
I don't want to wake up later in life not having had a choice in where my life went.
Welcome to Your Creative Push, the podcast that pushes you to pursue your creative passions. I'm your host, Youngman Brown, and my guest today is Mioree. Mioree is an artist and partnered streamer on Twitch who works mostly digitally but also loves many forms of traditional art. And she comes on the show today for a very powerful episode, not just if you want to stream your art process, but also if you have been struggling from any type of creative block or resistance. She talks about how she started out as an artist on Twitch and her advice for artists who want to start on Twitch, especially how to stream when there's going to be crickets at first. She also discusses how streaming can cure art block, Twitch in comparison to Instagram Live, Facebook Live, or any other streaming platform, and how helpful it can be to consolidate your ambiguous thoughts into words as you go through your process of making art, with an audience or without. She also talks about her own mental health, dealing with burnout, perfectionism, imposter syndrome, and being too hard on herself, and the value of spending time to create systems to better your mental health as an artist. And finally, Mioree talks about habits and being deliberate about what entertainment she consumes, using neuroplasticity to start new habits and wean off your bad habits, and how she uses time tracking apps and devices such as Habitica and Timular. I had such a pleasure speaking with Mioree. She's one of the kindest, most humble, and helpful guests that I've had on this show. And I know beyond a shadow of a doubt that you are going to be super inspired today by my friend, Mioree. Enjoy. Mioree, welcome to Your Creative Push.
Thank you. Thank you for having me.
No, thank you so much for coming on. I've been watching your streams recently, where it's inspiring to watch you not only do your thing, drawing, but also answer all the questions. I don't know how you multitask, and I can't wait to get into kind of Twitch and streaming and all that stuff. But before we do, I always like to give my guests the opportunity at the start to sort of share how you got to the point you are today, creatively speaking.
Well, it's, pretty cliche. It's not a special story. I mostly lacked support from my family. My dad was an artist growing up. Him and my mom had a falling out when I was 3. He used to draw me Barbies. Then I had to draw Barbies for myself. And then because my mom wasn't very supportive, I ended up posting online, which it was the only way I could get any degree of positive reinforcement for what I did. So I just kept on doing it. And slowly I discovered Twitch because I was also into gaming in general and stuff. And it kind of just, without my even expecting it, because how I got started on Twitch especially is a client asked me if they could watch my process. And I just was looking for any platform. And it kind of piqued the interest of people. And they wanted me to continue doing it. And that has helped me a lot with getting a sense of community. Building a community is, I think, one of the most important things that people do not maybe think is so obvious that goes along with art. I think it's hard to motivate yourself if you don't feel like you belong in a community. And it was very valuable for me, Twitch, in getting that. So that's kind of how it became.
Yeah, and it's interesting you bring that up because a lot of the conversations recently that we've been having on the show revolve around community. And it seems like an obvious thing, like when you think about it, but it's something that I think artists kind of feel isolated. Like our artists are doing this thing all by themselves, and then the idea of sharing their work in the first place is a scary notion. It's scary to imagine putting yourself out there and facing rejection, facing ridicule, facing all these like crazy things that like all these worst case scenarios that you have in your brain that's going to happen when you put your work out there and then the mob comes to get you because you suck as an artist or whatever. And it's so not like that. But to have that support then when you put it out is so validating, and it's so necessary to kind of move you forward. So you started making Barbie drawings, and then
Yeah.
Is that what you were sharing online? And was it on
Mm.
Instagram?
I didn't have, it was not on Instagram. First, it was on DeviantArt, and I was just
Okay.
watching all these, like almost all of the huge artists that I still follow had their start on DeviantArt. And it was a very good community for, like, even if you were a very small account, because I remember I was not very good. I was just starting, but I would always get a couple of comments and they would always be nice, and it would mean a lot. I wish there was a platform like that nowadays, where even a small account can get some encouraging comments that can really keep them going when they may not have much support at home like I did, right? But I feel like with Instagram, it's very hard to get, even for big accounts, comments are very valuable in a sense, and it's a numbers game, and it kind of became the size of your account. When it gets to a certain size, you don't maybe focus so much on how important it is to have some, like, the individual people commenting on your work. Again, goes back to that sense of community. I'm pretty much sad that DeviantArt isn't like that anymore, right? Instagram is not like that. So
Yeah.
I think it's something that's missing right now for new artists, for sure. And I think it's part of why they feel more isolated nowadays. The competition is stiffer. Yeah, it's a bit of a different environment, I feel. But I started on DeviantArt, and then there was this exodus from DeviantArt, and everybody went to Instagram. And I didn't immediately follow. I did make an account, however. And I only took Instagram seriously after Twitch, because I started, like, Twitch got me very consistent and very enthralled and very completely sucked into my community. So I ended up producing a lot more artwork than I usually would have, which helped at the time. Basically, probably still, that's all that matters for Instagram. They want you to make a lot of art. So it just kind of worked off of that, like, just grew together. Nowadays, it's harder for me because I have higher standards for my art, and it's increasing in difficulty to produce it at the rate it would need to be produced to have a very big impact on social media,
Right.
So I'm kind of struggling with that a bit.
Right. Well, it's always a struggle, I think, and it's always a balancing act.
Yeah.
And Twitch, I feel like for artists is something that is a scary thing to jump into, especially people that are just starting out who could actually gain a lot from having people comment and ask questions while you're doing your work, to have that kind of like interactive experience and building the community in that way. But I feel like Twitch especially is a scary thing to invite people into that process. And then when you invite people into that process, maybe having crickets, like starting out and you're streaming, but nobody's watching it to start. So would you have any words of wisdom or encouragement maybe for somebody who wants to maybe check Twitch out, but isn't necessarily looking forward to just being by themselves anyway?
Yeah, it can be very intimidating. Within, like, streaming in general, it is quite accepted and a known thing that at the start of your channel, crickets is basically all you'll get. And the difficult thing is, despite that, the advice is to keep talking. And because any moment, right, in any second you're silent, someone could just open a tab with your channel, right? Just for a second to see what you're about. And if you're there silently doing your thing, unless you're a pro player, right, you're likely to miss that opportunity to kind of capture their attention because you are silent, expecting nobody to be there. So therefore acting like nobody is there, therefore sending, those vibes, I suppose, is how you'd put it. So it is, honestly, I think, difficult for the ego to force yourself to speak when you know that there's probably nobody listening. But if you put yourself on the viewer side of things, for them, it doesn't seem as weird as you think you seem, you know? So if you can get through that, it's like probably the biggest challenge for any Twitch or live streamer in general, unless you already have a built-in audience. Another thing is, if you can get a friend that you can actually converse with, that way there's never going to be a dead moment. That's always the advice I give. That's how I did it at first. I had a friend and we would just kind of co-host my stream, just talk about anything really. And those who stopped by and saw anything we were talking about at the time could just jump in and throw in their 2 cents, right? That's always easier, I think. But ultimately, I think you cannot really grow on Twitch alone anymore. I think the best thing to do is probably YouTube at the same time as Twitch and kind of push your art, because Twitch does not have enough infrastructure in place to recommend channels and like natural growth there. The best people kind of send their audiences from YouTube, from TikTok, from Instagram to Twitch, right? It's kind of a bit of a problem in my opinion with Twitch, a bit of a inherent flaw. I hope they fix it because it's a lovely platform. I love it a lot.
Yeah. And so also maybe Instagram Live, is that a thing? Like, so should you have
I
like
don't think you can build a community there, but maybe, I don't know.
Well, in terms of like building your Twitch channel to start, like just have like all fronts, like just like every live streaming like opportunity you have, like where you have even any part of an audience, like Facebook Live, like can you direct all of them back to Twitch or back to a certain channel and like be on all of them at the same time?
So when it comes to the live streaming features of those websites, I think the base features are more like a reliable tool to send your audience, like actual videos you post. You could mention that you stream on Twitch. But if you mention that you stream everywhere, your audience is, in my opinion and experience, bound to be a bit scattered and uncertain as to where your commitment lies. You know, I would not advise that, but I'm sure it could work, I suppose. When it comes to Instagram Live, I feel like it's a pretty underwhelming feature from Instagram. I don't think Twitch is by far the best platform for live streaming, and it is in no way similar to Instagram Live, apart from the, just the fact that both are live. So I think it will never be a good way to sell your Twitch, because it would be just a different watching experience, in my opinion. So that's basically where I stand.
Right. No, it makes sense. And now, when you mentioned that you had like your friend with you starting out, were they on like Skype with you? Were they live there with you?
No, they were on Skype with me, and I would capture their webcam too.
Okay.
So we would have both our webcams there.
Cool. And would they be doing art as well, or like would you be talking about art stuff, or just simply having a conversation?
They were my boyfriend at the time. They were simply there to have a conversation with me. So Gotcha. They were kind of like maybe helping me take note of some comments in the chat. So something like that, not anything creative. But it is funny you mentioned that, because one of the most notable and eye-opening experiences when it came to that is that whenever I would get raided from other streamers or just new people coming to my stream, a lot of them would assume that they were the one drawing, which was interesting to me. A bit disheartening too. But at the same time, it was amusing at the time. I mean, I don't hold it against anybody. They probably fit more the cliche image anyway.
Right. That's funny.
It is, isn't it?
But disheartening.
It's a bit disheartening. I mostly accept it as it is. I think the world is moving towards better, right?
I agree. Hopefully. You mentioned when you're first starting out, even if there's nobody there, still kind of talking through the process maybe, or just talking out loud. And something that I've recommended before in the past, I'm not a visual artist myself, but I have recommended doing videos, like doing instructional videos, even if it's just for yourself as you're drawing, to talk through your process. Because just like, people that become teachers, who are artists who become teachers, it's like being able to dissect what you're doing helps you to kind of figure out your process, figure out why what you do works or why what you do doesn't work or what you're trying to avoid, and trying to compartmentalize the process. Is that something that you found that works for you, like as you're creating and maybe talking to your audience and saying why you're doing something with the art specifically, that helps you?
100%. A lot of the times, maybe the chat doesn't provide as much, conversation as some days are good, some days are bad when it comes to that. And I always have something to say about my process. I have gotten very good at narrating what I do and why I do it and kind of like walking people through it. Sometimes I have to admit, I'm not sure if people want that, but I know if I were young watching a stream, that's what I would be looking for. So I kind of try to like dispel my doubts and just think about a younger version of me and care about that for that moment. And it is indeed very helpful even for the artist to just kind of voice everything you're doing, kind of like force yourself, because a lot of thoughts tend to be very ambiguous and abstract in your mind, right? And it adds so much clarity when you actually search for the right words. It's almost like you can put a sharper focus on what you're doing, even for yourself. You're not just letting it be like floating, ambiguous, abstract mess, right? So it definitely helped teach me and improve and just help me overall, right? Because I never understood my process. I almost felt like it was instinctual before, and now I feel like it has some reason and I can detect some patterns, which is always helpful for improvement. So.
Right. Now, you mentioned that doing Twitch, starting on Twitch, it made you create more work, like just quantity-wise. Why is that?
Well, at the beginning, especially, the success on Twitch was directly proportional to how often you stream. It's still kind of like that, unless you, again, create content on YouTube or another platform with more discoverability. But it was this big pressure at the beginning to stream every day. So I would stream every day and like kind of blindly focus just on Twitch. It was good in many ways. It helped me improve tremendously, but it had its downsides for sure. There were times where I was so acting on autopilot so much that I couldn't really even detect that my mental health wasn't doing well. And that then it kind of contributed to a sort of burnout that I'm still struggling with at times. Streaming is very hard, I think, on mental health because of the culture right now. It's still, social media in general seems to be going in such a way where it's asking a lot of artists. And when you're a perfectionist, man, that's something. Yeah.
Well, speaking to that, then I kind of see where you're going with it. Like, does streaming and inviting people there and having a sort of audience, like sort of being, for lack of a better term, like drawing in a classroom or a auditorium or a stadium's like capacity of people watching, does that like just put the pressure on where you have to like, you feel like you not only have to be on with your art, but you have to be on with like your personality and like not having a bad day and stuff like that?
For sure. Almost always, when I actually do stream, it creates this weird high and like emotionally, I almost like focus in on the present to such a high degree that any problems that I might have had that day completely dissipate. It's interesting how that happens. But at the same time, before I start my stream, it's hard for me to convince myself when I'm, struggling, that I can be that. It's just one of those things. And I sometimes don't stream because the expectation seems so high to be like this thing, something that comes naturally when you think about it, but at the same time is exhausting. Even though it comes naturally at the end, is kind of exhausting to be your heightened self,
Sure.
Especially when you have a hard time. And then there's also the vulnerability of it all. I used to be much braver at the beginning with like doing figure drawings and drawings where it's not about the quality, it's about the quantity, right? Mm-hmm. But I felt so painfully insecure, being a perfectionist especially, that I stopped doing that and I stopped experimenting as much on stream because of this unavoidable feeling of being watched and judged, I suppose.
Mm-hmm.
I don't think I've mastered it, how to combat this feeling of being watched and judged. It's vulnerable for sure, but most of the people, when you actually look at it objectively, it's not at all how you make it in your mind to be. We tend to exaggerate things based off our emotions, which are inherently irrational. So, but when you're in the thick of it, it's really hard to distinguish, right? And you're live, right? You cannot really edit this. It is what it is. So there are moments in which panic ensues and you kind of want to just quit. I've learned to push through it. And I think that's one of the biggest advantages of streaming. When I had art block, I was live, right? There was no other way about it. I had to push through it. I got frustrated. I had to defrustrate myself. So it taught me a lot of skills in that sense, right? How to calm down, push through it. It was quite good. When you stick to it, streaming can be very rewarding, but also very exhausting.
Right. I want to circle back to the art block in a second, but I was just shaking my head in agreement because I can totally relate to the feeling of feeling either blocked or feeling even depressed or feeling not like Youngman Brown, the creative, inspiring guy, and not wanting to do it. I had that period about 9 months ago, and it reached the point of burnout where I was just like, all right, I really feel like I'm faking it because I don't feel like doing the podcast. I don't feel like being inspiring. Like I don't feel inspired myself. And then I needed to take a long break. So I can definitely relate to that feeling of needing to be on, but not kind of feeling it like you're faking it. Because your emotions they're not where they need to be when you hit record. So I can definitely relate to that. And I know that you said you haven't mastered it yet, but would you have anything that you've learned about either overcoming that or perhaps instead of overcoming it, realizing that maybe tonight isn't the time to stream or how do you kind of get past those feelings when you still kind of need to be on?
I'm still very harsh with myself, I find. I'm not very forgiving with myself. And that's one of the things that I've kind of dedicated this year on working on. I'm quite mean to myself sometimes, but
you're so nice to everybody else.
Well, that's probably it, right? I'm so afraid of people being mean to me or thinking, seeing myself how I see myself, that I don't know, I have empathy, I guess, for them. And I want them to have empathy for me because I feel like I'm struggling, right? A lot of the time, honestly. I think I'm a pretty sensitive person, which makes a bunch of things about this social media job pretty difficult. But I do think that ultimately, as long as you do your best to put yourself in the shoes of your audience, a lot of this can be dispelled. It works very well for me, at least, to rationalize with myself, but you also need to be in the right frame of mind, usually after a stream. In the middle of it, it's really hard to be objective. It's really hard to tell myself, okay, how do you feel when you watch people, Because I know how I feel. I don't judge them harshly. Most people probably are like me, So that's really soothing to me, but at the same time, there is this imposter syndrome, right? So a lot of time I feel like when you stream, a lot of people tell you how great you are. There's some mean comments, but my moderators protect me from a lot of that. But a lot of people tell you how great you are, how inspiring you are. And then you know it within yourself that you have such a deep struggle with it. You fail so often. You fail incredibly often. And you just wish you could convey to them how often you fail. So they don't feel like you're that big of a, because they tend to put you on a bit of a pedestal.
Sure.
And all I want them is to see themselves in me, not to put me apart or special, because I'm not. I'm so ordinary. I have all the problems you'd expect me to have, plus, right? And I just, when it comes to streaming, right, I'm faced with the thoughts, should I stream today? Sometimes I feel so this is kind of brutally honest, I guess, but I feel worthless, I suppose.
Mm-hmm.
But I try to rally up and not think about it and just press play. And then immediately I can forget about whatever bad thoughts I've had that day. That's the most effective. Sometimes I don't get to that point. But as long as I just, because you know how sometimes you might not believe in yourself, but you have to just take a leap of faith. That's what works for me. Consistently works. However, it is it's a demanding process in and of itself.
Right.
I don't want this to be too depressing though? Because I do struggle
No.
with a lot, but I'm trying to, like, I've dedicated the last 3 months of last year to creating systems for myself, and I've really binged a bunch of Skillshare classes. It's a bunch of productivity and not self-help, but like how the mind works, right? How it's susceptible to some things, some of those books and stoicism and all that. I just really did a lot of good for myself and prep myself for this year. So I am proud of myself. So I don't want this to be a downer, because I'm doing good and actually creating systems. I'm not sure if this is coming across like I'm a downer, but I'm just like making sure here.
No, not at all. But the thing is, that's like kind of the purpose of this podcast, and one of the reasons I thank you for coming on. And all my guests that come on, just to show that everybody goes through these like grubby, like bad times, and doesn't mean you're necessarily going through them now, but to recount them and to go back to them and to shed some light on the fact that this does happen to everyone, no matter where you are in your career, no matter even like the Neil Gaiman, who's one of the best writers, like still has imposter syndrome, still is waiting for the imposter police to, come to his door, like he says, like, and arrest him. Everybody has that feeling of like, who am I to do this? And one of the things that I found is putting yourself in uncomfortable situations that make you nervous, that you're afraid to do, like even jumping on interviews. For me, like even jumping on this one, I'm a little nervous, like but when you get past that, like for you, maybe streaming, it's like, oh no, I don't really feel like this, but you hit record, you stream for however many hours, and then on the other side, do you almost always feel better, or do you still?
Oh yeah.
Like, okay, because like I think art is one of those things that it's like, and also community, and like, when you're together with your friends, it's like you have that good feeling after and you want to go back to it. It's like these are things that we do as creative people to help, not necessarily fix our problems and fix our feelings, but to actually help us with those feelings of worthlessness or imposter syndrome or anxiety, like all these things. Like art helps us with that. Being in touch with like our creative self and putting stuff out into the world helps us to cope with life. And I think it's so important then to effectively hit record, whatever your record is for people listening, whether that's grabbing your camera and taking photographs, or that musical instrument, or streaming yourself doing art on Twitch, like whatever it is. Like it's so important to actually just be like, you know what, I'm not feeling it necessarily, but like let's try to get back to this thing I love and see how I feel afterwards.
Indeed. Like I never regret when I stream, ever. I actually am so happy and proud of myself when I stream. It is demanding. You're live, you're like there for speaking all the time and just being judged, I suppose, on some level, even if it's a good judgment, right? But it's always so rewarding at the end. Sometimes it's hard to convince yourself that you're worth people listening to you. That's one of the barriers for me streaming. Pushing record, I suppose, like you said. But when I do it, it's like, it's the best. It's probably why I even though I have my breaks and I need them, right? But I will always go back to it because it's just perfect. It fits this special place in my heart. Streaming does. I don't think video making would ever give me that sense of community that streaming does.
Right. Well, you mentioned systems, like that you've been working for the past 3 months on developing systems for yourself. Do you have any takeaways from that, or anything that you think might help me or help anybody listening to kind of get past those things?
They're productivity systems. They're like implementing habits. Because I'm a freelancer, it took me forever to accept the fact that I need a routine, right? I thought, the advantage of being a freelancer is the flexibility, and that's true, but you need systems, you need routines. Otherwise, you're very vulnerable to the whims of your mental health. And I was in such a bad place in 2019 at the beginning, especially. Through it, but especially at the beginning, that I was so desperate that I would like eat up anything concerning understanding my mind and why I have this somewhat volatile personality and what is proven to work. It's always that's so comforting to know that the studies have been done and this is proven to work. It's always the thing that most comforts me when I like look at these. And then I understood something probably super simple that some of you may understand inherently, but I understood that perfectionism needs to go out the window. I understood that how you implement habits is not like all at once. You need to make habits for yourself that are impossible not to do. So I have this big routine. It's big, but it's full of small steps, right? Read 1 page a day, meditate for 1 minute, right? Something that I look at it, how could I not do that, right? How could I not do that? Do I really not have a minute? I always have a minute. And of course, that almost always ends up being more than 1 minute of meditation, right? But even if it's just 1 minute, maybe I have a bad day and it's just 1 minute. I sat down and started it, which in my brain, right, cemented this habit. So I keep doing it every day, and I take a lot of reassurance in the fact that even if it's a little bit, I'm still cementing a habit that's gonna be like integral, an infrastructure for my mental health to not completely have its way with me, you know?
Right.
That's how I approach it.
Yeah, and that's the thing about mental health, and that's the thing about what I call resistance, or what Stephen Pressfield calls resistance, and why it's one of like the key questions of this podcast is because resistance is so tricky.
Yeah.
It can very easily trick you into thinking, oh, like you made this goal to meditate for 1 minute a day. That's silly. Like, like you're on day 30 and it's saying, well, you've had 3 days where you only did 1 minute. How important can this really be? And it's like, it's so interesting how it tricks you. But like you said, like developing that habit, or like, it's like forcing yourself to have a habit that hopefully sticks, so that becomes like a part of you, so it's not even something that you think about. It's really important. And I agree that setting like ridiculously small, easy goals is like the best medicine for that, because it's like you have no choice. Like if you don't accomplish 1 minute of that, or 1 page of a book, like come on.
Yeah, you can do it. Like if it's not 1 page, read 1 sentence, right? Because every day, like the thing that helped a lot early on, I found out about neuroplasticity, the fact that your brain actually changes with everything you do. Basically, you are what you do, right? That gives me a lot of hope personally, and that's what motivates me when I do see my to-do list and I see meditate for 1 minute. And yeah, it's kind of like, haha, 1 minute, yeah. That's going to do a lot. But at the same time, my brain will kind of walk that pathway towards a good habit again and again and cement it. Every day I do it, that other pathway that I used to do, like my other habits are less walked, overgrown, right? Not as used. And so my brain will automatically go to this good habit more and more. And that's so motivating. Even when I look at my like small goals for the day, they're really, really small. They almost always end up being like, in practice, you meditate more, and it's always like that. But even if it's just 1 minute, I'm creating a habit, right? Like you need to remind yourself. I think everybody listening needs to remind themselves that you're creating this pathway in your brain to the good thing that is more walked and more easy for your brain to access the more you do it. And that's the value in that, even though you're not getting as much value out of meditation, because say you're actually doing just 1 minute. Yeah, you're not getting much value out of that. But you're making this habit of having a space for meditation in your life. And slowly but surely, you're going to meditate more and more. And you're always going to have a space in there for meditation, which is, in my opinion, fantastic. I mean, it's a slow process, no doubt about it. It can be very unsatisfying for some.
Right, but it's also, there's so much value in just accomplishing goals that you set for yourself. And
exactly,
past Mioree made this goal, and then future Mioree like lived up to it. That's why even if it's like a tiny goal, like especially getting them done shortly after you wake up, or like before you start your day, and already having checked off however many boxes, like even as small of boxes as they might be, checking them off, you've already like succeeded in your day. And then that makes harder decisions later on in the day, like whether they're related or not to meditation or reading or whatever. It's like you made the right choice already a couple times earlier in the day. You're going to make the right choice on this unrelated task too.
it's been proven to snowball. Like the fact that you have this like feeling of accomplishment of like checking off a bunch of things makes you a more productive person overall. So it's not like, even though it's just 1 minute of meditation, overall it has a tremendous amount of value. Maybe not, exactly the meditation. Depends. I think there's very few people that will actually just meditate for 1 minute. So you can expect many more benefits, I think.
Definitely. Well, how many of these like boxes do you have to check off? Is it just meditation and reading, or like do you have like a whole list of stuff that you like to do?
I use this software. It's amazing in my opinion, for people like me at least. Habitica.
Yeah.
It's like you like it? Do you know it? I don't know.
Yeah.
I love Habitica.
It's so fun.
It appeals to me so much, and you can create subtasks. So I have a morning routine, an afternoon routine, and an evening routine. And I got this thing. Okay, I went a little bit overboard, but it goes to show how desperate I was to improve my life, right? I got this little trinket called the Timular. Not sponsored. Oh my God, not. But like, I'm trying to like actually see how long it takes me, because I have a lot of tasks, small tasks, right, in each routine. But like usually I spend 1 hour on the morning routine and then half an hour each on the evening routine. So I'm like, that's very worth it. I do so much in a day, and they're like, if I do them fast and time myself, I think one of your guests recently said you can do so much in an hour, right? So I never knew that. And that's also motivating and snowballs into a better life, right? Because if you have a nice tidy place, a nice tidy studio, and everything is taken care of by the morning, right? You can sit down at your desk and actually focus on what's important. And you have taken care of all the things that usually, not everybody's great at adulting and all that. Now I'm good though.
Yeah, that is good. And yeah, Dan Barry was the one that mentioned how much you can do in an hour. And I think when you can time it like you do to realize how much you can accomplish in 1 hour, it makes your 1 hours that you have through the day that much more valuable. Where like you don't necessarily want to waste an hour doing, X, Y, or Z, because of all the other stuff that's beneficial to you that you could accomplish in that hour. Of course, it's important to take breaks and have fun and live life. But at the same time, if there's something that's not serving you and it takes an hour or 2 hours, you can maybe a little bit more easily forego that activity or that thing to serve yourself.
What you said rings very true, because I actually had to be very severe with my cuts in life. Like I had to cut out a lot of hobbies. I tend to be a person with a lot of interests. Like I am very into movies and behind the scenes culture and how they get made. Books, I like to read fantasy, especially, so much that it's one of my favorite things. Streaming, obviously, gaming. Most of these things, there's more. YouTube, obviously. There's all of these take time. And I realized that if I live my life like that, I will never really be truly good at anything. So I decided that I will really cut down on everything, but the two things that I'm focusing on is my art and books, because there's infinite variety in books. So it's hard to get bored. And there's like so much. Like books are amazing and the most irreplaceable to me. And so I'm just focusing on those and severely cutting back on my consumption of YouTube and movies and TV shows, Netflix and all of those things. Games, I had to cut out games. It breaks my heart, but I had to.
Yeah.
I'm still leaving some room for stream games, right? Because then I can combine two things, but it's hard. There's so little time if you really... if you're really ambitious, I feel.
And there's so much good stuff out there. Like there's so many good shows now, and they can take, if you get into a good show, that could be up to 10 hours in a season. There's so many good movies. There's so many good games that could really take a lot of time. There's so many good books. There's so much good content out there. You could have many lifetimes of consumption of taking them all in. And it is important to take in some stuff to get inspiration. But if you want to be a producer and not a consumer, you really have to cut a lot of that stuff, even as great as it may be and as like artistically fulfilling as it could be to take that stuff in. If you do want to be a producer, to give yourself those hours to actually produce.
But it goes without saying that if something is very well received, and everybody calls it a masterpiece, I'll make time, right? But I'm not going to jump at, like, I want to become the person who doesn't sit at Netflix and just scroll through and see, what am I going to watch when I can read, right? When I have so many books that I want to read, I don't want to be mindlessly just searching for content because I want to be so desperately distracted from reality. That's when I tend to procrastinate too. So I just want to be more deliberate with my choices. I still want to watch the best movies of the year, right? Because part of me will never stop loving movies. I still want to play some games. Games are tricky because they require so much time. But I would still be open to it, but I used to be the kind of person who watched every movie that came out that year. So I would waste a lot of time, honestly. So I'm trying to be more deliberate. I'm trying to I don't want to wake up later in life not having had a choice in where my life went, I just want to make the choices and think about them and be thoughtful and not just take it for granted, I suppose.
Yeah. Yeah, I'm guilty of that too. Seeing every movie, seeing every TV show. Now I have some rules in place. Like for a while, I completely cut out movies and TV because they were my biggest time suck when I did my time dump and saw where all my time was going. But now I have a rule that a TV show, I won't watch it unless it's like at least through its third season because I don't want to risk like getting into a show that gets canceled.
Yeah, Firefly.
Yeah. Oh no. Yeah, I know Firefly. My wife watches Ray Donovan, and that one just got canceled, and that was many seasons, and she was pretty emotional. But like it's almost like the stuff that people recommend, letting it like a fine wine, like letting it age a bit before you sink your teeth into it, so that when you do have some time to consume some stuff, the stuff that's like left over, that's still on your mind, that you still want to see, has had that, passage of time to really decide if it's worth your time or not.
I think that's such a good idea. Yeah. I usually will just watch something even if it's in their first season, but this idea is very good. I might adopt it.
Yeah, you don't want to be heartbroken when they cancel your favorite show,
I wonder if I would even have started Game of Thrones if I knew how it ended, I wonder.
Don't even get me started on that. I'm the same way. I think I would have, though. I think it was pretty masterfully done and beautiful.
It really was, right? That has to be an exception. I cannot wait to get to the books, but I'm not reading them until they're all out because my heart, I just cannot wait like 20 years. Just can't.
Yeah, that's the way to do it. People have been waiting for a long time. There is a lot of angst amongst Game of Thrones book fans that they're just like, when is he gonna release it?
I'm sure it's soon enough, I guess.
Earlier you mentioned perfectionism and how you have to just throw it out the window. And I am a bit of a perfectionist myself, and I've talked to a lot of perfectionists. I think it's something that a lot of people struggle with is, not being able to finish something because it's just not right, and not just not finishing it, but then not releasing it out to the world and showing the world. So is it as easy as just throwing it out the window? Like, how have you sort of approached like the battle with perfectionism?
I do have some practice in catching myself in it. Of course, like some of it is bound to slip through the cracks. Some of it I probably may not want to even admit is there. I don't think it's a perfect process. You will like sometimes still be influenced by perfectionism, but I think I have these days a visceral reaction to perfectionism because I know so deeply how terribly it has affected me and really my productivity, right? So, and people know this because I communicate a lot. So either my community will catch me in it or I will catch me in it, right? Or a friend of mine will. So if you're the person who can reason with yourself and can separate your emotional turmoil from your rational choices, and I think most times than not, you can ignore your feelings and just do what you from experience know to be the right thing, right? But I think it does depend a little bit on the person here. For me, it was pretty much as easy as that. It depends. I mean, it's imperfect. I have to stress that. Sometimes I fail for sure. And when I fail, because I still have those tendencies, I tend to be really harsh with myself, like really harsh. And I just have to try again and do better. I mean, there's no point in digging in myself, right, when I fail. So I just remember to just try again.
And to be kind to yourself.
It's so important to someone like me, man. I think perfectionists in general, right? I think our inner monologue is so toxic. I mean, it can be for me. It's like almost like I'm beating myself with words, right? With words,
Right.
and that's it's just a vicious cycle that leads me exactly where I don't want to be. So I guess I've been hurt and burned so much by my bad habits, perfectionism leading the charge, that nowadays it's clear to me, but I think the clarity comes from the amount of mistakes I've made.
So you said perfectionism was leading the charge, and you've mentioned a couple others, but are there any other sort of resistances that you find yourself in the past, maybe that you've struggled against, or maybe still currently?
Yeah, I'm an all or nothing person. So when perfectionism had its claws on me, I used to think too ahead. I was like, is it even worth starting? Maybe I'm just not good enough right now to even start this, right? It's really toxic when it gets like that, when you're all or nothing, right? It has to be perfect or not at all type thing. But then there's also the quieter everyday, doubts, imposter syndrome that happens. It's all kind of a cacophony that leads to an inability to really be productive, in my opinion, and to even work with yourself.
Now, and you mentioned like when it's all or nothing, and when it is all or nothing, and you do have that art block, you mentioned before that when you're live streaming, like you just push through it. You're able to because you have to. When you're not live streaming, then when you find that art block, do you try to get into that same mentality, like to just push through it? Or like, is it a different experience then when nobody else is watching?
For sure, because of live streaming, it has illuminated to me how much of it is solved by pushing through it. Pushing through it isn't always the solution, I guess, but I probably would have quit always if I wasn't streaming and had to push through it, and saw that if you just continue, it eventually goes away. The thing that it would be the most frustrating will be the fact that when you're art blocked, as you're pushing through it, you might not make progress. Your time might be wasted, right? You might be making progress in the wrong direction for your piece. But I think it expedites the art block so much that you're pushing through it. Like if you just let it be, there's an element of fear that you'll still have it when you return that kind of makes you procrastinate a little bit. So it's given me a lot of clarity. And nowadays when I am struggling with burnout, I tend to just start another piece but still keep working, so that way I don't have necessarily the frustration of making the progress in the wrong direction that I was talking about on my original piece that gave me some degree of art block. And I can start something new that can be discardable, and also kind of let my mind just process through it, kind of like free flow, just let it do whatever it wants with that piece, right? There's no pressure. And that has been like, when I'm not live, that has been key for me. So I'm really happy I discovered it.
Yeah, discardable. I like that because I think being able to take that pressure off of yourself to, create the masterpiece, or, be going in the correct direction. And if you're not going in the right direction, then it's just going to be a failure. Like taking that pressure off is so important. So when you kind of work through that then on a different piece, do you find that it's like, it just kind of clears your mind, or like in creating that new piece and letting your mind just go wherever and wander wherever, that in that process you find the solution or the correct direction to go to in the first piece?
The latter. I do think that when you let your mind just sort through whatever confusion it's going through to make that art block happen, I think it does eventually lead to clarity, right? On your original piece. Like a lot of the times that's how it happens. And even in art school, they recommend you need breaks, right? Sometimes that art block is just a need for a break, a need for distance from that particular art piece. Because it is, I'm pretty sure it is a proven fact that your eyes just stop seeing flaws in the things you're used to looking at. So that's why the flip helps too, right? In Photoshop and Procreate, you can flip the canvas, and it kind of resets a bit how you view the image. You stop viewing the character or the subject, you view the shapes, right? For a split second, and you kind of see the mistakes better. A break does similar stuff. And I think art block is kind of like a more intense version of that. It's a bit more probably abstract and unclear, but if you just take the pressure off, right, and not have to deal with the frustration of making progress in unproductive direction and just start something new, then you won't have as many negative feelings or panic associated with the whole process of being art blocked. And you just allow yourself to just go a bit on autopilot and figure it out, not thinking really. I think that's probably the best thing to do. Just don't think too much about it, right? Because for me, a lot of the times art block is a bit of overthinking too in the mix.
Yeah, I love that. It's like flipping your brain, flipping the canvas of your brain so you can see it a little bit differently. It's very poignant.
What you're drawing is not actually the subject. It's the shapes of the subject, right? Like it's like that pipe thing. It's not a pipe. It's a picture of a pipe, right? And you need to reconnect with the fact that you're not actually drawing the subject. You're drawing a bunch of shapes together composed to represent the subject. And I feel like we lose ourselves in the meaning of the subject and see it too much as the subject and let too little as the shapes that make it up. And the shapes are so critical. And maybe that's where the art block comes from. I'm kind of speaking off the top of my head here. I need to think this through more, but that's somewhat of a theory of mine that maybe it's important to reconnect with what you're actually doing. Like shapes. It's all about shapes.
It makes a lot of sense. I love it. Now, just talking about not necessarily the business aspect of what you do, but just like the kind of handling of your day, handling of your week, handling of all the balls that you have in the air. Can you talk a little bit about like how you plan that out and maybe planners or calendars or notebooks, or like how do you keep everything down or keep everything in line?
So I tried so many productivity systems, I probably tried most of the apps, right? I landed on Habitica as my personal. It's just for my personal routines mostly. And I decided that for me, it's important to like physically take notes down, because when I have an app that's managing my everything, I tend to fall into the habit of not opening that app. But I almost always have my planner open on my desk, right? So when I'm distracted, sometimes my eyes land on my to-do list, right? So I just get these hints from my environment that I need to, keep connected with what I have to do, because you have to. Otherwise, the temptation is to just bury your head in the sand, at least if you're like me. And so decided those two systems work for me. So I tried to do a method of bullet journaling in my planner alongside Habitica and Trello. Those are they combine my productivity system. With Trello, I manage a lot of my Twitch team, my moderators, what we do, any project gets managed there, and things get added to my calendar off there. And then I just transfer them to my calendar in my planner. So yeah, that's basically how it goes. I'm not sure if you were asking specifically about the tools I use, but I ended up answering that.
No, that's perfect. Well, do you have any other tools that you use, or any other resources, things that you look for either inspiration or, like you said, productivity?
Obviously, like for inspiration specifically, I think Pinterest is probably the best one. Everybody probably cites it. It's just an amalgamation of all kinds of things to help. But the thing that has been most novel, that is meant to enhance my productivity right now, that I'm trying out, is this little gadget to track my time and routine, because I want to see how much I can get out of my systems, I suppose, because I do want more free time. That's kind of the goal right now. More time to do art and more free time, and how to where everything fits. So even now, it's been months now that I've been using this productivity system. I'm still finding that some things need to be moved. There's a lot of times I catch myself trying to force something to happen at a specific hour when it's been proven not to be the ideal time for it. So now I'm trying to learn to move things around to truly make my own itinerary for the day. I am a little bit like I said, still have my all or nothing tendencies, and I tend to work even when I don't stream. So it can lead to burnout, unfortunately. But yeah, I'm trying to still find free time and still do everything I have to do in the most efficient amount of time.
That's great, and that's such a healthy way to look at it. And so often it's no matter what apps you use or what devices you use. What was the name of the app or the device? Timular. Okay. So yeah, like it doesn't matter what you use, but just the actual act of just looking at it, just like observing it, like observing where your time goes and what's effective, what's not working,
Exactly.
not being too hard on yourself, just moving some things around until you can develop that perfect system. And it's never going to be perfect, but at least for that moment, it will be perfect until you need to move some other things around. But just the act
You're
of
right.
looking and trying, I think, is so key.
Yeah, you probably, like, as you grow, your needs change. You probably have to shift things around kind of constantly, but at the same time, some things will remain where they are, like, for instance, I don't know if I'll ever change when I meditate, because I found this like sweet spot, because I've observed my habits, and I realized that if I go to my office space before I meditate, I tend to stay in my office until like almost I have to do my nighttime routine. So I just end up not meditating at all, right? So it's just kind of like, I know that if I don't stick with it before I enter my office, I'll just forget. I'll just get sucked into the like work things of it and like just not make time, basically. So that's the kind of thing. And I prefer it this way, right? Like some yoga has to be done in the morning, right? When the sun is beaming, because it just fills your heart with light and it makes you happy, and happiness needs to be like literally gripped and hold on to, because it's fleeting. I have a bunch of routines that are like strictly for my mental health. For instance, I was never a tea drinker, but these days one of my happy places is to just get 3 biscuits and some tea and just sit on my computer and do that and just eat some biscuits and tea. And even though it just seems like I'm treating myself, So it's important to have those as a habit, because of course you can do them anytime, but if you have them as a habit, you kind of never forget and you feel taken care of more like consistently. It pays off more, I think.
Absolutely. Tea and biscuits. That's getting added to my list. That sounds lovely. Mioree, this has been so amazing and so insightful and so inspirational, but it is time for the final push. And that's where I ask you to reach through the microphone and grab the shoulder of one of the listeners that you've already really inspired today and just give them your best final words of advice and push them to pursue their own creative passions.
I've thought a bit about this, and what I would say is don't be too eager to label yourself. I used to use some labels for myself, like I'm a messy person, like I'm all or nothing, I'm perfectionist, and I used to just accept it. I let myself even investigate the possibility that they might not be true, that I might be more like flexible and changeable than I thought I could, until I got so deep into a depression where I would try anything. So I just encourage you to not let yourself get to that point, and don't label yourself too easily, because the brain is very plastic. You can enforce the habits you want to enforce. You can be the person you want to be. You are what you do. And just make sure you read a lot and keep informed on all the ways humans are amazing and capable of change, and just keep trying and do better and be kind to yourself, obviously, because that's big for me. So yeah.
Mioree, thank you so much for coming on the show today, for taking the time out of your busy schedule, out of your busy life, out of taking time away from your streamers and hanging out with us for a little bit to share your story. I really appreciate it.
It was my honor. It was a blast. Thank you for giving me a voice on your platform. Thank you.
Oh, of course. And for everybody listening, you can find her on Instagram as Mioree_. That is MIOREE_. Or you can head to today's show notes page, yourcreativepush.com/Mioree. Mioree, thanks again.
Thank you.
Oh man, I told you that was a great episode. My thanks once again to Mioree for coming on the show. 2 quick notes here at the end. One is the idea of flipping your art. That's something that I've watched her do all the time. Flipping, like she said, flipping the screen back and forth. inverting it so that you can look at your art in a different way. And yes, that is a great practical strategy for digital artists, but I want you to think about that as a metaphor for how you can flip your art, whatever your art is, whatever your creative thing is, how you can flip that and look at it differently. How can you see what you do on a daily basis that you might look at over and over again in the same way? How can you see that in a different light, in a different way, with a new set of eyes? One thing that I do when I make my words plus music videos is I take the words that I write in the video and I put them on a piece of paper. I write them out by hand and see what they look like, kind of as a poem. Also, I'll transfer the video to my phone and I'll watch it through my Google Cardboard so that I can see it in virtual reality, which sounds crazy, but looking at it like that instead of on my computer screen makes me feel like I'm looking at it at an IMAX theater. And I got to admit that doing that is really fun to do, and it's cool, and it makes me feel like my work deserves to be in a movie theater, but it also allows me to see it from a different set of eyes, from a different viewpoint. So what are some ways that you can look at your art in a different light and see it through a different set of eyes as best you can without actually switching to somebody else's body? Maybe if you're a painter, a digital artist, or a photographer, you can do what I do and actually upload your stuff to your phone and look at it through Google Cardboard to look at it as if you're looking at it at a gallery from a different perspective. Perhaps if you're a writer that is used to writing on a word processor, you can try writing it out on paper in a notebook. I don't know, for every individual creative person doing many different creative things, there's going to be many different possibilities of seeing it differently. But have you actually actively thought about how to see it from a different light? How to flip the canvas, so to speak? Take a few moments and use your creative brain to think about new ways that you can flip the canvas and see your art in a different way. And the second thing I wanted to touch on from this episode real quick was the idea of setting ridiculously small goals in order to get your mental health in order. Like Mioree said, 1 minute a day. That's all it takes to set that new habit and to get in that much healthier mental state, to wean off the bad habits and to start new habits in the most bite-sized chunks that you can make for yourself. A few weeks ago, I actually made a video on the YouTube channel about this, about using ridiculously small goals to get out of creative blocks or creative funks. And you can check that one out at yourcreativepush.com/small goals. On our next episode, we have Mitch Bowler. Mitch was on the show back in episode 102, which was 4 years ago, which is crazy to me. But he comes on the show to talk about what he's been up to since then, how Pencil Kings has evolved since then. And speaking of evolve, what he has helped to create with the Evolve Artist Program, which is going to be the first sponsor of Your Creative Push. So he talks about his journey as well as Evolve and what it can offer for you as an amateur artist if you want to take your skills to the professional level. So I am so incredibly pumped to bring that to you next week. But if you want to check out when Mitch was on the show before, you can head to yourcreativepush.com/102, or we'll have everything linked up at today's show notes page. As always, yourcreativepush.com/353. But that's all I've got for you today. So hopefully you were inspired to go and get your work done. So go and get it done. Find a way to flip your art, to look at it differently. And remember to set those ridiculously small goals for yourself in order to help to get your mental health in order and to start feeling great about your day. I love you all so much. And remember that the universe needs your creations and you are the universe. And we'll see you next time if you need that push again. Bye. Hey, YouTubers. If you like this episode, I handpicked another one for you. I think you'll like it just as much. Just click it right there on the left side of your screen. And on the right is a playlist of episodes from guests that came from the same creative field as the one that you just listened to. And please, please don't forget to hit that like button on your way out before it goes away. Enjoy the next episode.